The exhibition Picasso Studios at the Doha Fire Station Garage Gallery showcases over 100 works by Pablo Picasso, ranging from iconic paintings and sculptures to prints, drawings and ceramics, from the exceptional collection of the Musée National Picasso-Paris. Though his 8 studios are presented in chronological order, this is not a full retrospective, but rather a means to better understand his production in the context of their creation. The studios were quite diverse as they reflected both his life at the time and his growing wealth. Picasso was inspired by the environment of his studios, which was often very chaotic, full of materials, tools and eclectic artworks from his collection, all found objects, interested as he was in their forms, textures and combinations. The studio was in that way an actual laboratory. The Bateau Lavoir, Paris, 1904-1909 and 1912. The Bateau Lavoir, or wash-house boat, is the first studio that Picasso rented in 1904 in a popular neighborhood in the north of Paris called Montmartre. The nickname Bateau Lavoir was given by the poet Max Jacob because the shape of this collective building, which hosted studios and home for journalists, writers and art dealers, reminded one of the shape of an ocean liner. In the Bateau Lavoir, the living conditions were very harsh and basic. Picasso and his companion Fernand Olivier lived without running water or electricity. There was almost no heating in winter, which was, according to Picasso, conducive to creativity. This place has all the characteristics of Picasso's studio: a clever disorder, Picasso's personal collection, for example his African of Oceanian masks, were mixed with his own works and artificial lighting that as Picasso used to work at night. In 1907, his outlook was marked by primitivism, a return to the origins of art. This is the time when Picasso created his wooden sculptures, which are roughly carved and often covered with polychromy, and the interest in wood and archaism can also be seen in his paintings. And in 1909, the birth of Cubism can be seen in the Sacré-Cœur painting. The studio at Rue Schœlcher, Paris, 1913-1916. After several stays in Spain and in the south of France, Picasso returned to Paris and moved to a new studio at Rue Schœlcher in 1913 in the Montparnasse district of the left bank of the River Seine. The studio is here more than ever a laboratory, the place for the gestation of original forms, as Picasso wove links between a variety of artistic processes to present a new reality. Picasso integrated volume in its two-dimensional works and created a novel category of media between painting and sculpture, such as glass and packet of tobacco, where Picasso glued colored beads on a recycled wooden panel. Utilizing a bewildering combination of materials and techniques, Picasso composed constructions with the new and non-artistic materials, such as bottle of bars, glass and newspaper, made of folded and painted tin plate, or portraits, such as the man with moustache, with mixed oil and printed textile. The studio at Rue La Boétie, Paris, 1918-1941. In 1918, in parallel with increased recognition of his work, Picasso moved to the studio and apartment of Rue La Boétie, an upscale district in Paris, with Olga Koklova, a Russian ballet dancer whom he had recently married. In this studio, the luxurious appearance of the apartment in a bourgeois style contrasted with the disorder of the studio. And the intense period of Cubism is followed by a return to classical forms and themes. Picasso reinvents classicism in paintings such as Reading the Letter, and takes up sculpture again by creating new works born from the welding of materials, a technique learned alongside the sculptor Julio González. Studies bring together all the research carried out by Picasso to date: Cubist compositions, classical motifs, and surrealist inspiration. It highlights his taste for fragments, portraits, and still lifes. The studio at Rue La Boétie is also the place where other important artistic themes were built, such as the myth of the Minotaur, which was sometimes an allegory of the artist himself. The castle of Bois-Jaloux, Gisors, Normandy, 1930-1936. In June 1930, Picasso bought the Bois-Jaloux castle in Normandy to take full advantage of the perfect setting for a sculpture studio in the castle stables. As André Breton wrote in an article entitled Picasso in His Element, the studio became a real laboratory where the profusion of materials fed the artist's appetite for experimentation in wood and plaster, objects which Picasso used for moulding. In Bois-Jaloux, Picasso became fascinated with Marie-Thérèse Walter, the young woman he met in 1927 who became his muse. In the painting Still Life, Bust, Fruit Dish and Palette, Marie-Thérèse is represented in a plaster bust inspired by antiquity. Her sculptural face is the inspiration for numerous variations in drawings and sculptures, where the artist recomposes the curves and anatomical features of Marie-Thérèse. Here again, Picasso gives a new life to the topic of the Minotaur, which is now led by a young woman who has the face of Marie-Thérèse. The studio at Rue des Grands Augustins, Paris, 1937-1967. The interiors of the studio at Rue des Grands Augustins, occupying the two front upper floors and the attic, reminded him of the Bateau Lavoir, and featured heavy wooden ceiling beams and large central stove. These became distinguishing motifs in his work. The artist in front of his canvas is a self-portrait painted at Rue des Grands Augustins, which perpetuates the myth of the artistic genius with Picasso in his emblematic striped shirt in the act of creation, with his color palette and paintbrushes proudly displayed in the foreground. Picasso increasingly made portraits divided between gentle evocations of Marie-Thérèse and perceptive geometrical figures inspired by photographer Dora Maar, whom he met at the beginning of 1936. At the outbreak of World War II, Picasso sought refuge in the seaside town of Royan on the Atlantic coast of France, though he returned to Paris after the war. During the German occupation, morally isolated and forbidden to exhibit his artwork, Picasso refused all special privileges and continued to work despite food rationing. He recalled these experiences in powerfully evocative still lives. In the apartment, Picasso turned the bathroom into a sculpture studio, and there, other major sculptures, such as Head for the Woman in a Long Dress, also anguished, were realized. The Fournaise Studio, Valoris, Côte d'Azur, 1948-1955. The scenery changes when Picasso migrated to the south of France in 1948. First in Valoris, a pottery village famous for its production of ceramics. The Fournaise Studio is a former warehouse where Picasso created sculptures made with scrap metals, old bicycles, and pieces of palm trees which he gathered from his outings. "He is the king of rag pickers," said Jean Cocteau. In this studio, Picasso created more than 4,000 ceramic objects. The ceramic production is inspired by the Mediterranean themes and above all by antiquity. The years at Valoris are happy ones and are marked by family themes. Picasso spends his life with Françoise Gillot, his companion since 1943, and she gave birth to two children, Claude and Paloma. Then the scenes of family life offset a bewitching bestiary populated with fauns, owls, bulls, and other creatures, both mythical and real. The studio at La Californie, Cannes, Côte d'Azur, 1955-1961. Picasso moved to Cannes in 1955 in a villa called La Californie. The spaces were huge and the high windows offered beautiful views on the garden and the bay. According to the testimonies of the visitors to the villa, the studio decoration functioned as a stage device, theatre in the truest sense of the word to display his work. In the painting Studio of La Californie, Picasso pays tribute to Henri Matisse, who died in 1954. He leaves the canvas in the middle of the composition, empty and blank. In his drawings, the representations of the studio are like interior landscapes where nature and palm trees enter the studio and sculptures surround paintings. Indeed, Picasso has invented a new kind of sculpture made with painted and folded sheet metal. He first started by creating some paper models, then enlarged these in sheet metal. Some of the sculptures are inspired by his new wife Jacqueline Roch, whom he married in 1961. From Vauvenargues Castle to the Mass of Notre-Dame-de-Vie, Vauvenargues and Mougins, Provence, 1958-1973. In 1958, Picasso left his Villa La Californie, mostly because some real estate projects would have obstructed the view he had on the Bay of Cannes. He bought the Vauvenargues Castle, which was next to Aix-en-Provence and close to the Saint Victor mountain, once painted by Cézanne, whom Picasso admired. The studio was on the first floor in a large room with Hispanic influences. Spain was the source of many paintings where Picasso reinvented artistry. Here the Matador, the typical character of the Spanish Golden Age. In a pared-down environment conducive to the expression of his genius, Picasso seized upon furniture and whitewashed walls, which he decorated and reproduced on his canvases, such as the sideboard at Vauvenargues. In Vauvenargues, Picasso eventually felt too alone, and so, in 1961, he moved to Notre-Dame-de-Vie in Mougins. It is the time of his engravings, with their incredible accumulation of detail and mixed techniques. Numerous paintings representing his studio and portraits in bright colors bear testament to his reflections on the act of painting. His final phase of creativity ended with Picasso's death in April 1973. His burial took place on the ground of Vauvenargues Castle.